All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started today. My name is Danielle Clore, and I'm the CEO of Kentucky Nonprofit Network, the State Association of Nonprofits. I want to welcome everyone on behalf of our Advocacy Alliance members who are co-hosting this press conference with us today. The Association of Independent Kentucky Colleges and Universities, Family and Children's Place, Fund for the Arts, Goodwill Industries of Kentucky, Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky, Hosparus Health, Kentucky Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Kentucky Voices for Health, YMCA State Alliance, LexArts, Markey Cancer Foundation, Metro United Way, Mountain Comprehensive Care, New Vista, Prevent Child Abuse Kentucky, and the Prichard Committee for Academic Excellence, as well as the over 100 nonprofits from across Kentucky and KNN's 805 members. We thank you for joining us on this call as we are asking our congressional delegation for relief needed by Kentuckians and nonprofit organizations. Ours are the organizations across the Commonwealth on the front lines, working to assist our neighbors with food and housing insecurity, education, healthcare, including mental health, childcare, and more. We're here to tell you and our congressional delegation today, we need help. The CARES Act, enacted in March on a bipartisan basis, was a lifeline for Kentuckians and the nonprofit and business communities. At that time, everyone thought this virus would fade in a couple of months. It didn't. And our lives and our economy remain at severe risk, and more relief is urgently needed. Many nonprofits, quite frankly, were saved by the Paycheck Protection Program loans. It saved us from closing our doors, but that money's run out. And nonprofits are again facing layoffs at best and closures at worst. Unemployment costs for self-insured nonprofits, state and local budget cuts, increased demand for services, increased expenses, lost fundraising and programmatic revenue, and more are putting the backbone of Kentucky's communities at risk. When a business closes, jobs are lost, life savings are lost, and dreams are lost. And for the customers or consumers, our favorite local restaurant or store may have closed, and we have to find another favorite to give our business. It's tragic on many levels. It's important to note nonprofits are businesses too. When a nonprofit is forced to close, jobs are also lost, livelihoods are lost, and dreams are often lost as well. And for the consumer, and this is a critical and important distinction, vital services and programs disappear. There may not be another nonprofit down the road to get our business. And this isn't just tragic, it can be the difference in life and death for Kentuckians. Kentucky's in a unique position in that Senator Mitch McConnell serves as the Senate Majority Leader, and 3rd District Congressman John Yarmouth serves as chairman of the House Budget Committee. We have an opportunity through their leadership and that of all of Kentucky's congressional delegation to urge their colleagues to get back to work to address the critical needs facing Kentucky and this nation. Senator McConnell notes that he's the only leader in Congress not from the coast, a champion of Middle America. We need him to champion for Kentucky right now, and we need the rest of Kentucky's congressional delegation to follow suit, to put lives before politics, and to get back to the negotiating table. Yesterday, Senator McConnell said, I do think we need to reach agreement, but that the cooperative spirit we had in March and April had dissipated. I think all of us on this call today will agree with both assessments. We need agreement on a relief package, and we desperately need Congress to return to the cooperative spirit that put the public good ahead of partisan gain. We ask our very influential senators and representatives to put aside partisan interests and lead the way, to demand and exemplify that cooperative spirit again that we so desperately need. Today, our speakers will highlight the needs facing Kentuckians and outline 4 asks of Kentucky's nonprofit community necessary to meeting critical needs. Nonprofits are the 4th largest employer in this Commonwealth, employing over 154,000 Kentuckians, generating over $7.5 billion in annual wages. And we're on the front lines of COVID-19 and the calls to address racial injustice. As our asks are also echoed by 1.3 million nonprofits across the nation. the nation's third largest employer, employing over 12 million Americans and generating over $826 billion in annual wages. Our nonprofit community asks our continue emergency funding programs by enabling a second round of Paycheck Protection Program loans and appropriating funds for federal and grant programs to state and local governments that depend on nonprofits to deliver services to the public. Kentuckians rely heavily on services that are made possible by nonprofit partnerships with the Commonwealth and city and county governments. Additional federal funding to state and local governments is essential to our survival. Number two, extend loan programs to mid-size and larger nonprofits with more than 500 employees, because the CARES Act largely excluded them. Number three, strengthen charitable giving incentives by expanding the above-the-line charitable deduction in the CARES Act, which was $300 in only 2020, to $4,000 per individual in 2020 and 2021. So this incentive is universally available to all Americans, not just the wealthy. Number four, provide full federal unemployment coverage for self-insured nonprofits by increasing the federal unemployment insurance reimbursement from 50 to 100% of costs. So with that, I'm going to let you hear from some of the nonprofit leaders and those folks impact on the ground who are going to talk about these asks and the urgent needs of Kentuckians. So first up, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Sheila Schuster. She's the Executive Director of Advocacy Action Network. Sheila?
Thank you so much, Danielle, and good morning. We know that the COVID-19 virus is affecting Kentuckians. We hear those numbers from the governor's office every day. How many new cases are reported? How many are in the ICU? How many have recovered? And sadly, how many Kentuckians have died? What we don't hear every day, but we know is happening, is how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the mental health of all Kentuckians. How many of us are feeling anxious, depressed, suffering from abuse or violence, withdrawing from interpersonal contacts, unable to do our work, drinking or using drugs to ease the pain, despairing and feeling suicidal. Unfortunately, it is many times the total number who have actually had the virus. It is Kentuckians of all ages and life circumstances who are suffering from what a psychologist colleague of mine called the trifecta of anxiety and despair. The threat of life-changing events over an unknown period of time with little to no sense of control. It is its own pandemic. We hear the experts talk about the next wave of COVID-19, but I'm here to tell you that it is here. It is the mental health and addiction needs of our family members, even our young children, our friends, neighbors, co-workers, and ourselves. There's never been a sustained time in our history when so many Kentuckians have needed their community's public safety net of helping, supporting, life-sustaining agencies than right now. Kentucky's community mental health centers and other treatment agencies, our rape crisis centers, domestic violence shelters, and children's advocacy centers are trying to rise to meet the challenge as they always have. But while the demand is greater, their task has never been more difficult. It takes money, personnel, and resources to meet these mounting human needs, funding which these safety net agencies find lacking. The calls to crisis lines are increasing. The attempted suicides and overdoses are higher than ever. And yet, these public safety net agencies are struggling with financial burdens and uncertainty. Congress must absolutely act to address this issue and must do it now. The silent pandemic, the mental health pandemic, must be treated just as we are treating the physical impact of the virus. Kentuckians and their families are feeling the scourge of crippling anxiety and depression that will have negative effects for years if not addressed and treated now. Kentucky's public safety net can only meet the need if there is immediate funding directly to them or through new funds from Washington to our local and state governments. I beg Senator McConnell and our congressional delegation to come together now to save the mental health of all Kentuckians and the safety net agencies that serve them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Next, we have Pam Darnell. Pam is the president and CEO of Family and Children's Place in Louisville. Pam?
Thank you, Danielle, and good morning, everyone. So Family and Children's Place has been in business in our community, helping kids and families for 137 years. So we have seen a lot of changes over our history. Our work is to prevent child abuse and family violence, to stop it when it happens, and to help those who are hurt to heal and recover. In a typical year, we will see 5,000 children and their family members across 12 counties in Kentucky and 5 counties in southern Indiana. And that includes one of the largest child advocacy centers that Sheila mentioned, as well as one of the largest hands-on visiting programs in the state, counseling, out-of-school services, and new Head Start, early Head Start services. But like so many nonprofits in our state, COVID has significantly impacted our revenues. Our revenue losses include a government contract reimbursement reduction of 23%. And like many other nonprofits, we had to cancel in-person fundraising events, and donations from individuals and corporations have reduced as well, all as a result of the COVID crisis. So for example, from mid-March until the end of June, for our agency, these losses totaled over $240,000. And these losses continue into this fiscal year. In addition to the revenue losses, like everyone, we've also had additional expenses for PPE, for additional cleaning in our offices, for telehealth support that we had to quickly pivot and organize and purchase. So not only the revenue losses, but then the extra expenses related to COVID to have our workplaces safe, because throughout this whole thing, our services have continued. Like many human service providers, we could not stop, but our services continued. You know, research shows that 80% of nonprofits have less than 4 months of cash on hand. And so that's the majority of us in Kentucky and across our state. For us, our payroll protection loan was about $580,000, and it saved us. As Danielle said in the beginning, it saved us through August. And now our future revenues are uncertain. Even though our services continue, and like other organizations, the need for services continues to increase while the revenues continue to decrease and the uncertainty is pervasive. So we implore our congressional representatives to work hard to come to consensus. We need more payroll protection loans with flexible forgiveness. And we need to make sure those loans that are still $150,000, that ought to be automatically forgiven. And it is critical because our nonprofit services in Kentucky are part of the public safety for the communities across our state. And we implore our Congress and all of our representatives to work together now to make sure that there's additional funding for the state and for these nonprofit organizations who continue to help and provide the critical services across our state, and include helping victims of rape, helping families who need housing, helping with mental health services, helping with arts, and all these awesome services that nonprofits across our state provide every single day. And we need those services. And without additional support, it is fearful that many of these organizations that provide the critical services that sustain life in our communities will close and will no longer be here. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Pam. Next, we have Emily Beauregard. She's the Executive Director of Kentucky Voices for Health. Emily, welcome.
Thank you, Danielle. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today to talk about the lifeline that Medicaid provides for Kentuckians and our economy through our nonprofit healthcare safety net. Before KVH, I spent about 10 years working for federally qualified health centers, which make up a huge part of our safety net. These are nonprofit, community-led health centers operating in over 90 counties throughout our Commonwealth and serving more than 500,000 Kentuckians, regardless of ability to pay. And in many of these areas, there are no other providers. During the Great Recession of 2008, health centers rose to the occasion and expanded services to meet greater demand for affordable care. And that's what they're doing now. but they couldn't do this without federal funding and Medicaid reimbursement. And that's what I want to talk a little bit more about today. Since this pandemic began, close to 228,000 Kentuckians have lost their jobs along with their employer-sponsored health insurance. This essentially doubled Kentucky's rate of uninsured almost overnight. At the same time that we've seen the unemployment insurance system overwhelmed and struggling to process claims, over 226,000 Kentuckians have been able to enroll in Medicaid during the pandemic. It's an anti-recession program that's working. The fact that Medicaid has offset the loss in employer-sponsored health insurance is exactly why we call it a lifeline. Medicaid was designed for times like these, and it's an essential part of our safety net for kids, people with disabilities, underpaid and unemployed workers, and Black and Brown Kentuckians who are sick and dying in greater numbers during COVID-19 due to systemic racism and inequitable access to care. Medicaid has a history of helping people in our economy in times of crisis. When Kentuckians lose work and income, Medicaid is there to provide affordable health coverage and peace of mind. It ensures people have access to COVID-19 testing and treatment with no out-of-pocket costs, and helps people stay healthy so they can go back to work when this pandemic is finally over. What truly makes Medicaid a lifeline, though, is that it doesn't just help the people who are enrolled in coverage. It brings nearly $10 billion into Kentucky's economy every year. It keeps the doors of rural hospitals and health centers open. It ensures kids get a healthy start in life. It creates jobs and helps out-of-work Kentuckians get back on their feet. And it reduces our uninsured rate at a time when no one should be without access to affordable, high-quality health care. This pandemic has put an extraordinary strain on our state and local budgets, along with the community health centers, rural health clinics, community mental health centers, local health departments, and hospitals that serve every single one of us. The fact is that the majority of our healthcare safety net providers are nonprofits running on tight margins, and they can't keep their lights on without Medicaid reimbursement and federal support. If Congress doesn't act soon, the pressure on our state budget could result in cuts to Medicaid and other vital safety net programs at a time when Kentuckians most need them to get through this crisis healthy and whole. Kentuckians are struggling. This pandemic is nowhere near over, and the last round of federal relief passed in May isn't enough to keep Kentuckians healthy, housed, and fed right now, let alone as the year progresses. Instead of cutting programs like Medicaid, we should be turning to them in times of crisis. While the HEROES Act attempted to increase the federal match for Medicaid to 89 cents on the dollar, which would save Kentucky an estimated $1.5 billion in state budget costs over 18 months, the HEALS Act and other skinny bills put forward by Senate Republicans have no such provision. We urge Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and our Kentucky delegation to put Kentuckians first and act swiftly to negotiate a bipartisan agreement that will provide substantial aid to state and local governments and strengthen the resources of our nonprofit safety net providers to see our Commonwealth through this disaster and help us thrive on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emily. Next is Bridget Blum-Ramsey. Bridget is the president and CEO of Prichard Committee for Academic Excellence. Welcome, Bridget.
Good morning, and thank you, Danielle, for your strong leadership on behalf of Kentucky's nonprofit community, all of whom are on the front lines working to support Kentuckians through this extraordinary time. My name is Bridget Blum-Ramsey, and I'm the president and CEO of the Prichard Committee for Academic Excellence. We are a statewide, citizen-led nonprofit working to improve education in Kentucky for nearly 40 years. We study priority issues, inform the public and policymakers about our findings, and engage citizens locally in a mission to move Kentucky to the top tier of all states for education excellence and equity, early childhood through post-secondary. Kentucky has made significant progress, coming from the bottom of the national rankings in the 1980s to the middle, give or take, in more recent years. However, over the last decade, our progress has begun to decline. Before the pandemic, students were already losing ground in the critical areas of reading and mathematics relative to other states. and inequities in the delivery of education for students of color and low-income students were becoming increasingly clear on state assessments. Growing awareness of historical racism and the global health pandemic combined are laying these inequities bare. And the pandemic specifically has added another layer of inequity, which will exacerbate all the others, the digital divide. According to the US Census data, Kentucky ranks 42nd in broadband access, with 19% of Kentucky households reporting no broadband of any kind. This has ramifications for education, employment, and healthcare access, all of which impact the quality of a family's life and a student's ability to learn, as well as the ability of many of our nonprofits to provide service during this time. Thankfully, many Kentucky nonprofits are stepping up to pay for broadband access and other necessities in low-income households and are working with school districts to find ways to close the digital divide in rural areas of our state. Stimulus package relief to these nonprofits is critical to make sure children have what they need, both for their education and for their well-being. The Prichard Committee formed a coalition of education, nonprofit, business, and health leaders from across the state in May and sent a letter to Senator McConnell and members of Congress encouraging them to find solutions and invest for better broadband access in the Commonwealth. We believe that the internet is as necessary as electricity and plumbing is for our daily lives. Fundamentally, Kentucky needs to band-aid the issues of access in the near term as we persist through the pandemic, and our nonprofits play a critical role in this work. Our state and federal leaders, however, must move toward a statewide broadband infrastructure plan that addresses access, affordability, and adequacy. This would include coming to a better collective understanding of the magnitude of the digital divide to help guide public policy and community response. We urge Senator McConnell and members of Congress to come together quickly and pass an appropriate stimulus package so Kentucky's nonprofits can continue to provide the human services and the supports for learning that Kentuckians and our students so desperately need in this difficult time. Such a package should include funding for broadband internet and its infrastructure as an absolute imperative to support remote learning, remote work, and remote access to healthcare through the pandemic and beyond. The Prichard Committee stands firmly with the Kentucky Nonprofit Network and all of its members, urging Congress today to quickly come together and provide relief to our states and our local communities.
Thanks, Bridget. Thank you so much. Next is David Osmore. David is the Executive Director of the Kentucky Alliance for YMCAs. David, welcome.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you to the Kentucky Nonprofit Network for inviting me to speak with you about the YMCAs of Kentucky, our role on the front lines of the COVID-19 crisis, the unemployment relief all nonprofits need, and the need for federal support to our larger nonprofit organizations in our most populated cities. The YMCA currently operates over 50 branches and camps in Kentucky. We serve over 480,000 Kentuckians annually, and we've served Kentucky since 1853. A little bit about our COVID-19 relief. The YMCAs responded quickly to the challenge. 21 YMCA locations transitioned in late March to serve our communities as emergency child care centers. YMCAs serve children of first responders, medical personnel, and other essential workers. YMCAs have provided over 100,000 meals since the pandemic began to needy children and families. YMCAs have conducted thousands of wellness checks to one of our most vulnerable populations, and that is our seniors. And now YMCAs have just begun to operate full-day child care centers during non-traditional instruction time during the virtual learning restart of our school year. Some of our largest barriers to continued service is unemployment relief for self-insured nonprofits and support for our largest nonprofit organizations. Collectively, our YMCAs in Kentucky that are self-insured for unemployment costs have a total liability of over $4 million. And this is after the 50% waiver from Congress in the CARES Act this spring. We are very thankful that Congress did indeed act and provide the 50% waiver, but as you can see, YMCAs need more support. And this is just a small percentage of the overall nonprofit for unemployment liabilities. Our largest YMCAs in the Commonwealth did not receive the Payroll Protection Program, or PPP. So YMCA branches and camps in Louisville and Northern Kentucky have been forced to cut thousands of employees and spend thousands of dollars from their reserve funds and their endowment funds. Our ask is very simple. We ask Congress to, number one, waive the unemployment, 100% remove the liability for nonprofit organizations. Number two, expand the definition of qualifying employers that are eligible for the Payroll Protection Program and allow a second opportunity to participate. Remove the cap of 500 employees. And finally, help us to find funds to serve now. Help nonprofits that are currently stepping up during the virtual learning school calendar. Nonprofits are doing the right thing for Kentuckians. We're serving. We're on the front line, and we will continue to serve, but we need your help. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you, David. Next is Mandy Simpson. Mandy is the Director of Public Policy with Metro United Way. Mandy?
Thank you, Danielle, and a huge thank you to the Kentucky Nonprofit Network for leading instrumental advocacy efforts to alleviate the deep pain that we're hearing about today and that we share every day, and for empowering all of us to stand side by side to lift up the actionable, practical solutions that are absolutely within Congress's power to employ immediately. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about childcare and the urgent need for resources to sustain those providers to support children, families, and our workforce. But to do that, we really need to understand what this looks like every single day in the individual lives of children and parents. So I'm proud to introduce to you Kristen Walker-Collins, who is a working mother of 2 daughters in a household where both parents must work to sustain, to share her experience. And I'll also note, professionally, she is Associate Director of Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky. So she sees this from many angles, all powerful and all important.
Thank you, Mandy, and thank you to the Kentucky Nonprofit Network for listening to working parents and what we're going through. As Mandy said, my name's Kristen Walker-Collins. I'm the Associate Executive Director of the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky in Hazard, Kentucky. I'm also Board Chair of the Appalachian Early Childhood Network, and I'm here to talk about childcare. And I could talk about it from the perspective of an employer and the impact that it's had, or I could talk to you about the public policy and advocacy arm. But I'm here to talk to you as a parent and the impact that childcare has on working parents. Eastern Kentucky is a childcare desert. Where I live in Perry County is a childcare desert. And at the beginning of this year, Perry County had 5 licensed childcare centers, not Head Start, but licensed childcare centers. And in February, before COVID-19 came to Kentucky, one of them shut down with 3 days notice, leaving 60 children and parents and families without adequate childcare, putting more of a strain on the facilities that were here that were already at capacity. Fast forward several weeks and the state mandated shutdown of childcare for non-essential employees. And I found myself at home, working from home with my husband and trying to care for a 3-year-old while being 9 months pregnant. I had a baby in April. Do not recommend having a baby during a pandemic, but neither here nor there. And my husband and I were making the decision every single minute of every day of choosing between working and being a productive employee or caring for our daughter, and who could take on what role at what minute. And I say that we were working from home, and in reality, we were barely just surviving. And the only way that we survived 4 months of being at home was because I was on maternity leave for 3 of those months. And I fully expected our daycare to open June 15th when everyone was allowed to reopen. And they didn't for several reasons. One, they couldn't get the PPE that they needed. Two, they couldn't get the cleaning supplies. They couldn't find it anywhere. You couldn't find anything on shelves. And three, most importantly, they couldn't get staffing. And they couldn't find people that were willing to put their lives at risk and come to work every day for the nominal amount of pay that they make. And I don't blame them. And ultimately, our child care center reopened on July 13th. And my husband and I, we talked to our pediatrician and we talked to friends and family and made the decision that childcare was the best option for us. And it was the only option for us. And the night before it opened, I was rocking my 4-month-old to sleep. And it dawned on me, am I making the right decision? Is this what I need to do? And so I called my husband in there and we talked for 2 hours. Going around of, well, if we don't send them to daycare, what are our options? Well, how do we continue working? What does that look like for our family? And I know that that is the same conversation that every single family in Kentucky has had over the last 6 months about whether or not it was the right decision for them and if they could afford to stay home or could they afford to go to daycare. And ultimately, we went to daycare and everything has been wonderful. 2 weeks in, they shut down for 3 days, and I found myself at home with a 3-year-old and a 3-month-old. And yet again, back to that surviving phase, not working, just surviving. And I was making my plan B. You know, what happens when things shut down again? And daycare centers don't have that luxury. They don't have the ability to make a plan B, because if they don't have adequate funding and they can't keep staff, and they can't keep open, that when a shutdown happens again, they will not reopen. And where does that leave us? That leaves us with children without care, parents unable to work, and businesses without workforce. And that is no place to leave it. So I'm going to give it back to Mandy to talk about the advocacy part of this. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And I would note, Kristen has had this experience with her child care center, but 1 in 5 of Kentucky's 1,700 plus child care centers have not been able to reopen since the mandated shutdown. And as you heard, and as we all feel, Kentucky was already a child care desert. We were on shaky ground before, and now we're absolutely in quicksand. And as we enter an era where we are talking about critical investment in K-12 schools, we lift up that families depend on both K-12 education and childcare for the education and supervision of their children. In fact, our recent statewide parent survey conducted in partnership with 2 of the people on this call, Metro United Way and the Prichard Committee, we found that 70% of parents reported having school-aged children. Those parents know that learning does not begin in kindergarten and the workday does not end with the school bell. To ensure the success of children as well as careers, parents need both. But we know childcare is where we've struggled to see the adequate investment needed and has the greatest risk of complete devastation in this pandemic. We're already seeing permanent erosion take place. We know that we're at risk of losing 40% of our childcare sector throughout the pandemic permanently. And what we're hearing on the ground is it actually feels like it's much higher. In Jefferson County, we found that 52% of providers, and this was just a few weeks ago, did not know if they had to close for any reason, if they would ever reopen. That is half of the childcare providers in one Kentucky county, and we know it looks similar in other counties where there was the benefit already of having childcare, which is not true for all of our fellow members of the Commonwealth. So we implore Leader McConnell and Kentucky's congressional delegation to come back to the negotiating table to work together now on the moral, educational, and economic imperative to prevent the permanent erosion of our child care sector, which we know is the workforce behind the workforce. And as Kristen said, without that immediate investment of $50 billion in child care and development block grants in the next relief package passed urgently, we will continue to have children without care, parents without options, and businesses without employees.
Thank you so much, Mandy, as well as Kristen. Appreciate hearing that frontline experience. Next, we have Kristen Boone, President and CEO of Fund for the Arts, to talk with us about philanthropy's role, because we know there are many who would argue, well, philanthropy can just pick up the slack, and we wish that were the case. So if you can talk to us about that, Kristen.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you for the opportunity. I'll start with the arts. We know the arts inspire, challenge, educate, and thrill us. But in recent months, we have recognized their ability to comfort, heal, and provide hope to us as never before. We've relied on music and literature and film to help get us through, and our artists have shown up in new and different ways, in living room concerts, in virtual performances. But the arts and culture organizations and artists in the Commonwealth have been devastated by the pandemic. The arts, whether it's theaters, museums, performance halls, concert halls, they were the first to close, and they will be among the last to return. That is nearly $1 billion in annual economic impact in the state. Our Kentucky arts organizations returned $4.7 million in federal taxes, $1.5 million in state taxes. In Louisville alone, our organizations over the last few months have shrunk by 25 to 50%, and some are 90% smaller in staff size. Thousands of Kentuckians have been furloughed from these organizations. Thousands of Kentucky artists and musicians that are independent in the gig workforce are unable to work because of venue closures. Collectively, the Commonwealth's performing arts centers, arts organizations, museums, zoos are losing millions of dollars a day due to closures and are in desperate need of significant federal support to continue to employ thousands of people, rebuild our communities and our nation's tourism industry, and simply survive through the years to come. We know that as cash-based businesses, the economic stability depends on ticket revenue. But in times like this, organizations will need charitable support more than ever. What we know is these organizations, all of our nonprofit organizations, are projecting a decline in charitable contributions as donors have to reassess their capacity to give. That's our individuals, that's foundations and corporations. The need is so great right now, and the pressures are so strong. What we know is that donors give for many reasons, but data shows us that charitable giving tax incentives encourage more and larger donations to our Kentuckians' favorite nonprofits and charitable causes. Data shows us that the number of US households giving to charity have steadily declined in recent years, and we're seeing that here in Kentucky as well. Increasing the standard deduction with the Tax Cuts and Job Acts significantly decreased the number of Kentuckians itemizing their tax deductions, which is good for simplification for taxpayers, but it removed the incentive, the tax incentive, to make charitable donations for thousands of Kentuckians. The CARES Act provided a small tax incentive, but to really make a difference, more is needed. There are bipartisan solutions that have been proposed in Washington, and these must be included in relief legislation. Nonprofits need private donations now more than ever, and we need real solutions that encourage Kentuckians and Americans to support their favorite causes as they are able. These actions will help to ensure that Kentuckians still have our treasured places of learning, inspiration, and connection, and unique Kentucky culture in our communities in the future for our children and grandchildren to follow. So we encourage our congressional leaders and Kentucky delegation to move quickly to address these needs. The recommendation laid out by KNN and our partners across the Commonwealth are critical. Some of those include increased investment in arts and culture to help rebuild our communities and tourism through proposed legislation such as Save Our Stages and the Restart proposed legislation. But we also encourage our delegation and congressional leaders to increase the incentives for charitable giving and overall support for all nonprofits through appropriate stimulus to support not just nonprofits, but the people that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Appreciate hearing from you. Our last but not least is Heather Anderson. Heather is the McKinney-Vento liaison for Paducah Public Schools. So welcome, Heather. We look forward to hearing from you.
Greetings from Western Kentucky, everyone. A crucial part of my role as a McKinney-Vento liaison is collaboration with community agencies and nonprofits. My students who are identified as homeless depend greatly on those services. The pandemic has overextended already stretched thin agencies. The agencies support the needs of my most at-risk students and their families with clothing, housing, any kind of counseling needs that they might have, and shelter. The educational system and the nonprofit system has a very synergistic relationship. We make each other stronger. The benefits of working together are incredible. I know that we have to be relentless in our pursuit to serving our families and students, young people. They are the most vulnerable neighbors in Kentucky. We have to stabilize this safety net that everyone before me has talked about. Every piece and part is crucial to maintaining and increasing health and social benefits for our young people who are very vulnerable. This is a human issue. It's not a partisan issue. When we're talking about serving children, there should never be a question of how much. It should be, all right, now. We have to serve them now. And I think that we're in this for the long haul. I would like to see everybody here be able to succeed and continue with the services that they provide and increase those services. I would like to see in Western Kentucky, we get support and are able to serve in an excellent manner. We do need our leadership to help us with that. I don't want to see our nonprofits fail because we in the education system depend on them. We need them.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Heather, for the work that you are doing there in Paducah and in school districts across Kentucky, and appreciate hearing from all of our speakers today. You're just hearing from real Kentuckians, from McCracken to Perry County, and nonprofits who are serving Kentuckians everywhere in between. And normally when we speak on nonprofit issues, we are more upbeat and talking about all of the wonderful and amazing work nonprofits are doing, and know that that work still continues. What you're hearing are nonprofits who are stepping up. And stepping up in big ways. And we know that the suffering, the uncertainty, the anxiety, and the pain that our folks that we're serving, and many times our own nonprofit employees, are very real. The issues and concerns were real when nonprofits urged Congress to address additional relief in July, and they are indeed real, and now they are dire here in September. Congress must act. Kentuckians and nonprofits need relief. Again, those asks are for the sector. Continue emergency funding programs by enabling a second round of Paycheck Protection Program loans and appropriating funds for federal grant programs to state and local governments that depend on nonprofits to deliver services. Extend loan programs to mid-sized and larger nonprofits. Strengthen the charitable giving incentive by expanding the above the line charitable deduction in the CARES Act from the $300 up to $4,000 per individual, and extend it for 2020 and 2021. We need these to be available to all Americans, not just the wealthy. And finally, providing full federal unemployment coverage for self-insured nonprofits. Some of our larger and most vital organizations across Kentucky, like YMCA, our private colleges and universities, and our nonprofit hospitals. We need that increased reimbursement from 50 to 100%. So again, I thank our speakers today, our Advocacy Alliance co-hosts, our KNN members and nonprofits across Kentucky, and our members of the media. You've heard nonprofits making, Kentuckians making excruciating decisions about their lives on a day-to-day basis. And you've heard nonprofits who are stepping up to meet community needs. We are urging Kentucky's delegation, don't give up on Kentucky. Please continue the good work from the CARES Act and move swiftly to include the bipartisan solutions that are needed by nonprofits serving Kentuckians in comprehensive COVID-19 legislation. As you heard today, the needs facing Kentuckians and the nonprofits on the front lines assisting them and strengthening our Commonwealth are urgent. Kentucky and our nation simply cannot wait any longer. So thanks so much to everyone for joining us. We'll now take some questions of anyone on the panel. So if you are a reporter, you have the opportunity to unmute yourself. You're also encouraged to put those in the chat box, whether you're a reporter or a nonprofit organization on the line. So with that, do we have any questions we can answer?
Hi there, I have a question. This is Chris Larson with Louisville Business First. What have you heard back from the delegation? You know, these folks do have staff that try to represent where, you know, their employers are at, but what do we know so far on what they have told you guys as far as what they're willing to do?
Well, Chris, I'll speak and I'll let anybody else who's heard anything different chime in. I know when we communicate with the delegation, staffers in particular, we are always told we will share that with the congressman or the senator, depending on who we're speaking with, and we don't get much more from there. There have not been, certainly, if anyone who deals with staffers know, they rarely commit on what's going to happen until the legislation is in the works. So we've not heard much more than we hear these concerns. We know they're important. And again, we have seen some movement on some of the implementation of various aspects of the CARES Act, which has been very helpful. But we, again, as we mentioned today, we certainly know that the need is urgent for more relief. I don't know if there's anyone else on the panel who's heard other comments from various members of the delegation that want to share. I suspect that's fairly consistent with what we're all hearing. Any other questions?
Hi, sorry, just one more.
Yes.
One more question related to that. You know, I'm sure everybody's putting on their thinking caps or breaking out their crystal balls on trying to guess when there will be some kind of action or movement on the aid. Is there any best guessing or any ideas that either you guys have come up with or, you know, professional tea leaf readers that guess when this will come? When this will actually get back to when Congress will get back to the table?
I like your analogy there, Chris, because that's exactly, I think, what we need, are tea leaves, magic wands, crystal balls, all of those things that unfortunately we don't have a lot of room for right now. You know, there have been a lot of speculation. There was initially discussion that we would wait and see, and that when they came back in August, and that didn't happen. Then there was discussion around after the Republican National Convention, they would reconvene, and that didn't happen. Then there was discussion that around the U.S. Postal Service discussion that might spur some action. That didn't happen. Now there's speculation that maybe it would be next week before the election so that something happens. Then there's speculation that it wouldn't be until after the election. So we honestly don't know. And for every day and week that we don't know creates uncertainty among Kentuckians, and it's uncertainty among nonprofits of how long they can keep people employed, how long they can continue to keep their doors open. So we've not really heard anything. And I think that's why this call to put partisan politics aside, regardless of the election, is absolutely urgent. We can't wait. We can't let that play out. We have got to have action now, both in Kentucky and across the country. So there's my crystal ball answer. Any other questions?
If since no one else is asking questions,
you go right ahead, Chris.
So Kentucky's not alone, unfortunately, nor is it unique in its position right now with the struggles that we've discussed here. And I'm sure that there are other people out there who want similar solutions. Can you tell us a little bit more about where your guys' work fits into the larger effort to lobby Congress?
Well, I think, you're seeing a lot of lobbying around various, for unemployment, for various benefits, as you heard people talking about today. We support all of those. And we also know nonprofits are on those front lines helping to deliver the services. So that's why, in addition to supporting all of those aspects of various relief proposals that are good for Kentuckians and good for Americans, we know that for nonprofits to survive, to be able to help implement many of the relief programs, we have to have relief as well, through the loan programs, through unemployment insurance assistance, through charitable giving incentives. So that, I think, is what's made this such a complicated puzzle to piece together. The asks are all intertwined, as you heard today, from Medicaid to child care to charitable giving incentives to everything as exciting as unemployment insurance. I mean, they are all tied together, and I think that is what makes this so complicated, and why the comprehensive aspect of this is so critically important. You heard a lot of these folks mentioning here today that they are, in addition to the nonprofit asks, have their own asks. So we are encouraging nonprofits to be bold and engaged, and be sure that Congress hears from them so that they can understand deeply what's happening on the ground with their constituents and our neighbors. We've had another question here. Are these policy proposals favored by one party or another? Absolutely not. That's the frustrating part of this, I think, for the nonprofit community. Everything we have discussed and laid out here with regard to the 4 nonprofit asks are bipartisan proposals. They're supported not only by both chambers of the House of Representatives and the Senate, they have both Republican and Democrat support. So that's what is so incredibly frustrating, and why we desperately need Congress to act and move on these things that we know have wide support in Congress.
Danielle,
yeah.
What are you asking nonprofits across the state? We heard from some nonprofit leaders today, but what are you asking nonprofits across the state to do? Do you want them to call? Do you want them to write? What are you asking them to do?
That's a great question, and I wish I could tell you we knew what would work, because we've been doing all of those things since this pandemic started. So we started, and we're blessed to get the CARES Act, and we celebrated Congress for that relief. And then we've been asking and sharing what's needed so we can push for more. I know folks are writing, they're calling, they're tweeting. So we don't know. This is kind of, not to say our last resort, but we thought we'd try this next. So we are doing this press conference to show, number one, the unity of the sector. As you heard today, there are a lot of subsectors, a lot of issues, from the arts to homelessness to hunger to education, environmental concerns. The nonprofit sector is a beautifully diverse industry in this state, and yet these needs that we've outlined are universal for all nonprofit survival. So we will share the recording of this video with staff, and hopefully that will get to our congressional delegation, as well as we're going to share it with members of Kentucky's General Assembly, because we'll be working on that next when they convene in January. And so we urge our members to do the same, to email and to tweet, and to however they have any contacts, both for these asks if you're a nonprofit, but then sharing their stories on the ground, so that Congress understands the real devastation and impact and anxiety that their constituents and our neighbors are facing. It's a great question. We wish we had the perfect answer, because everything we're trying is still resulting in inaction, which is frustrating and scary for the people that we serve. Other questions? I will say another piece that you can do, because I know, Renee, you're in Owensboro. So any reporters who hear this locally, we urge you to talk to your nonprofits on the ground, which I know you've done, Renee, so that they can share with you locally what they're seeing, how important the PPP loan program was, or if they weren't able to get one, how devastating that's been for them. So local nonprofits have a really important story to tell, and just like Heather and just like Kristen, what they're seeing both in Perry and McCracken County, those local stories are really important, and we hope will move our delegation to action. I know some folks have already mentioned letters to the editor. Absolutely. We, at this point, we're encouraging nonprofits to pull every trick out of their hat to try to get some attention and action.
Danielle, it's Debbie Yoder. I was wondering if you have any particular sector that's suffering the most or at greatest risk, or is it just across the boards?
It is across the board. You heard from two folks today that are really in an urgent situation, both Mandy talking about childcare, which is absolutely critical, and then you're hearing from the arts organizations as well, who, as Kristen Boone mentioned, may not recover. We're very worried about that, and we know it's easy to say, well, we're looking at basic human needs, hierarchy of needs, but we know how important the arts are to our mental health and how important it is to our economy in recovery. While we're looking at the short term, we can't lose sight of the long term. So I would say it is every aspect of the sector is facing its own unique and dire challenges right now. So it's not any one subsector, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Well, if I might add, Danielle, all of these are interconnected, interrelated, interdependent. So as we were planning this, we talked about, well, education is an underlying theme. Well, health and mental health is an underlying theme. And every piece that you heard, I think, today talks to the total lives of Kentuckians. So it's really hard to look at and designate one particular area because they all are so interrelated. If we don't have childcare, as Kristen pointed out, then we don't have the workforce, and people's mental health and access to care suffers. So, it's all of a piece, if you will.
Absolutely, Sheila. It's a complicated puzzle where we are all interconnected, and I think that's both the beauty of the nonprofit sector, and I think Heather pointed out what many folks don't realize, from the school system to businesses to local, state, and federal government. Nonprofits are critical partners in Kentucky's well-being and safety net and future, and so that's why we definitely wanted to point out that piece of, we hate to see businesses close, absolutely. And we also want people to understand that when a nonprofit closes, there's a very real impact, just like a business, but the people who are losing their services, that can be life and death. And so that's why the interconnectedness that Sheila points out of this is so really critical for folks to understand, and was a goal of our press conference today. Other questions?
Well, Danielle, I'll make a comment question, if you will. Renee Beasley Jones here. I think one of the things nonprofits struggle with as an entire sector, and it's that many people don't think of nonprofits feeding people, housing people, clothing people. They think of nonprofits like the Owensboro Fine Arts Center, the Owensboro Museum of History. They think of the River Park Center, the Bluegrass Music Museum, which a lot of people see as non-essential. And all those people who are connected to the nonprofit world understand how essential they are. But there is an entire segment of the community that doesn't want any tax dollars to go towards supporting those types of cultural nonprofits, I'll call them, at this point. But what people don't realize is that the nonprofit world is more about abused children, taking care of abused children, sexual abuse. Does anybody know the percentage in the Kentucky nonprofit world that has what you would call essential services? Has anybody looked at that? Does anybody know what that is?
Well, I think, Renee, you hit on it. Essential is certainly in the eye of the beholder. We know that the majority of nonprofits in Kentucky are human service nonprofits. That's a higher percentage overall. But again, as we've mentioned, essential is, we're so interconnected, and essential means different things to different people. So, again, I know so much focus during this COVID-19 pandemic has been on meeting essential needs, basic needs first, and that has absolutely been important. We also know that, as we've pointed out among various speakers here, about the interconnectedness and how we can't just look to that one aspect of it. But you bring up a really good point, and it's really part of the education that we've been trying to do at KNN and with our members for goodness 18 years, both with the general public and the General Assembly. So when you asked earlier what people can do, I think continuing to help educate about how critical nonprofits are for the very fabric of our society, not just with regard to services provided and quality of life, but jobs. We are the 4th largest employer in this Commonwealth. So you may hear a lot about various industries, but you don't often hear that about nonprofits. And so it is critical. So, you know, people can say, well, there are some nonprofits that probably needed to shut their doors anyway. There's duplication and we don't need to fund those kind of things. Those are Kentuckians. Those are tax-paying Kentuckians that we're talking about there. So we really hope that we can help spread the word about the importance of the sector, the whole sector. Anybody else want to speak to that on the panel? Okay. All right, any other, oh, I see some more in the chat, so I want to be sure. Are nonprofit networks connecting nationally to unify nonprofit voices? Absolutely. KNN and many of our members here are members of national associations who are doing this work. We are proud members of the National Council of Nonprofits, who's been leading the way and educating nonprofits and engaging us and our allies for years. So we're a very proud member of that, and I know many of the folks on this call are members of their own subsector associations, whether it be the arts or healthcare or education. So absolutely, these 4 asks that we share today have been sent nationally. They are part of a national nonprofit community letter that hundreds of nonprofits in Kentucky and thousands across the nation have signed on to. In the media packet that we'll send that follows up, you'll have a copy of that letter, so we'll be sure to share that with you so you can see that. But absolutely, we aren't unique in Kentucky in asking for our delegation to move on this. So that's why we mentioned nonprofits nationally, because they're hurting in every other state. These issues are not unique to Kentucky. Now, do we have various health disparities and other issues that may be more severe here? Absolutely. And again, that's why we call on our congressional delegation to hit on that middle America piece. We don't want to be forgotten or flown over here in Kentucky. We need their voice and support for our people. Let's see, did I miss any questions here? I want to be sure. I think we got them all. Any final questions, or any reporter, again, feel free to unmute that we might have missed, or any questions in the chat. I think we got them all. Okay, so again, thanks so much for everyone who's here with us today, and for those who end up watching on recording, please share this on your social media, share it with people who you think could benefit from the education, and please do connect with our congressional delegation. They have an incredible amount of influence. We are blessed in Kentucky to have both Senator McConnell and Congressman Yarmouth in leadership positions, and so we need them to exert that leadership role and get this thing moving so we can help Kentuckians. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good day and stay safe.